Did you know that the last major piece of land ever discovered on Earth wasn't found in some distant ancient century, but in 1913? And it's in Russia. We like to think the whole planet has been mapped, walked, and photographed. But Russia is so enormous that entire islands were being charted for the first time in the 1930s. And there are places out there, craters, plateaus, frozen archipelagos, that almost no living person has ever set foot on. Some take a week of travel just to approach. Some you can only reach by helicopter if the weather lets you. And some you're simply not allowed to visit at all. For most of us, Google Earth is the closest we will ever get. Welcome to a list of the most impossible to reach places in Russia and Siberia, ranked from the one you could just barely trek to a frozen island at the edge of the Arctic that almost no human is ever permitted to see. Number 4 is a lake so perfectly round it looks drawn with a compass. A hole punched into the Siberian tundra by a rock from space 3.5 million years ago. Number 6 is the last major landmass anywhere on Earth to be discovered, found, unbelievably, in 1913. Number 7 is an entire island that is nothing but a dome of ice. With a research station the sea has completely swallowed. And the final place is the last spot on the planet where woolly mammoths were still alive, walking around while the pyramids of Egypt already stood. But let's start with number 1. Deep in the Siberian taiga, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town, there's a giant cone of shattered gray stone that locals refuse to go near, a place they called cursed, long before any scientist ever saw it. We begin deep in the forests of the Irkutsk region of southern Siberia, in the Patom Highlands, a vast, roadless sea of taiga where the nearest real town, Bodebo, sits more than 200 kilometers away. Somewhere in that endless forest is one of the strangest objects in all of Russia. It's called the Patomskiy crater. And for the people who've lived near it for generations, it was never a curiosity. It was a place to avoid. On Google Earth, it barely makes sense. Rising out of the flat green forest is a near-perfect cone of broken gray limestone, about 40 meters tall, roughly 130 feet, with a base around 160 meters across. The top is a ringed crater, like the rim of a volcano, and sitting inside that ring is a smaller, rounded mound of rubble. The whole thing looks like a giant nest, or a cannonball frozen mid-splash, made of an estimated 1 million tons of shattered rock. It doesn't belong to the landscape around it, and nothing else like it exists nearby. The local Yakut and Evenki peoples have a name for it, the Fire Eagle's Nest. According to their stories, it was a cursed place where men fell ill, where animals wouldn't go, and where people sometimes simply died. Outsiders didn't take that seriously until a Russian geologist named Vadim Kolpakov stumbled onto it in 1949 while surveying the region. And even he, at first, thought it might be man-made, maybe a secret gulag site, because it looked far too deliberate to be natural. But here's what makes it a genuine mystery, not just folklore. Scientists dated the crater using the tree rings of the forest around it, and it appears to be only about 300 to 350 years old. Geologically, that's yesterday. The trees near it show a strange burst of accelerated growth, the kind you'd expect from a sudden disturbance, and nobody can agree on what actually created it. The obvious guess, a meteorite impact, has largely been rejected by experts because there's no impact crater underneath and no meteorite fragments. The leading ideas now involve a violent explosion of hot gas or steam from deep underground, punching a plug of rock up to the surface. But the honest answer is that no one knows for certain. And the curse folklore got one more chapter. In 2005, a scientific expedition set out to finally study the crater up close, and the leader of that expedition died of a heart attack during the approach, just kilometers short of reaching it. For a place already wrapped in stories about strange deaths, it was the worst possible headline. The Patomskiy crater is reachable, technically, if you're willing to travel for days into the Siberian wilderness. But even now, we can't fully explain what it is, and it only gets harder from here. From the Siberian interior, we travel thousands of kilometers east, all the way to the Kamchatka Peninsula, a remote finger of volcanoes and wilderness hanging off the far edge of Russia, closer to Alaska than to Moscow. Hidden in a river canyon here is something that exists almost nowhere else on the continent, a valley where the ground itself boils. This is the Valley of the Geysers, and you cannot drive to it. There is no road at all. The valley is a 6-kilometer gorge packed with around 90 geysers and countless steaming hot springs, blasting scalding water and vapor into the air on their own private schedules. It is one of the largest concentrations of geysers anywhere on Earth, second only to Yellowstone, and effectively the only major geyser field in all of Eurasia. And astonishingly, the outside world had no idea it existed until 1941, when a geologist named Tatyana Ustinova, exploring the frozen river with a local guide, felt a sudden blast of hot water erupt from the snow beside her. She had just discovered one of the natural wonders of Russia, by accident. The reason almost no one gets there is that the entire valley sits deep inside the Kronotsky Nature Reserve, a strictly protected zone, and the only realistic way in is by helicopter. Visitor numbers are tightly capped, permits are required, and the weather in Kamchatka can ground flights for days. Even if you have the money and the permission, the mountains decide whether you actually go. And this is not a stable, safe place either. On the 3rd of June 2007, the side of the valley gave way. A massive landslide of rock, mud, and debris thundered down into the gorge, burying roughly 2/3 of the valley floor in an instant and damming the river into a brand new lake that drowned some of the geysers completely. People feared one of the world's great geyser fields had just been destroyed in a single afternoon. Remarkably, within days the waters partly receded, and the largest geyser, the Velikan, the giant, was spared and kept erupting. But it was a violent reminder of what this place is, a living, shifting, dangerous landscape at the end of the world that lets almost no one in. And the next place is even bigger and even emptier. Now we head back into Siberia, north of the Arctic Circle, to a place that is not a single landmark, but an entire hidden world. Rising out of the tundra in the far north of Krasnoyarsk Krai is the Putorana Plateau, a colossal, table-topped wilderness of canyons, cliffs, and waterfalls, so remote that it has no permanent human population and not a single road leading into it. To stand in the middle of it, you fly, or you take a boat. There is no other way. The scale here is hard to grasp. The protected core of the plateau covers nearly 19,000 square kilometers, an area comparable to a United States state like Oregon, and it's stitched with more than 25,000 deep, fjord-like lakes and thousands of waterfalls, one of the highest concentrations of waterfalls on the entire planet. It sits about 100 kilometers from the nearest city, the isolated mining town of Norilsk, and beyond that edge, it is essentially untouched. UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site in 2010, specifically for being a complete, undisturbed ecosystem that almost no one ever sees, and its origin story is written into the rock itself. Those flat, terraced cliffs are the eroded remains of one of the largest volcanic events in the history of the Earth, the Siberian Traps. Around 252 million years ago, this region erupted on an almost unimaginable scale, flooding the land in layer after layer of basalt, an event so catastrophic it's linked to the greatest mass extinction our planet has ever known. When the vast majority of all life on Earth died out, what you're looking at on Putorana is the frozen, weathered scar of that ancient apocalypse, carved by ice into stair-step mountains. Today it belongs almost entirely to the animals. The plateau is home to its own unique creature, the Putorana snow sheep, a subspecies cut off here and found nowhere else on Earth, and it lies along the path of one of the largest wild reindeer migrations left in the world. Tens of thousands of animals moving across a land with no fences, no roads, and almost no people. Putorana isn't forbidden. It's just so enormous and so empty that reaching it means chartering an aircraft to drop you into a wilderness that swallows you whole. And from here, the list turns towards something even stranger. For our next place, we go to the far northeastern corner of Russia, Chukotka, the remote Arctic region that sits directly across the water from Alaska, and to something you notice immediately the moment you see it from above. In the middle of the empty tundra is a lake so perfectly, impossibly round, that it looks like it was drawn onto the map with a compass. This is Lake Eljikhygen, and that shape is not an accident of erosion. It's a wound. About 3.5 million years ago, a meteorite slammed into this spot with enough force to blast out a crater roughly 18 kilometers across, about 11 miles. Over time, water filled the center, forming a near-circular lake around 12 kilometers wide and an astonishing 174 meters deep, the deepest lake in all of Chukotka. From the ground, it looks like an ordinary, if beautiful, Arctic lake. From orbit, it is unmistakably the scar of something that fell out of the sky. Getting there is brutal. Eljikhygen sits about 200 kilometers from Pevek, the nearest town. With no roads across the tundra, you reach it by helicopter, by all-terrain vehicle, or by rafting the rivers through one of the emptiest landscapes on Earth. And yet, scientists went to extraordinary lengths to get to it, because this unremarkable looking lake is one of the most valuable places on the planet for understanding our climate. Here's why. During the ice ages, glaciers scraped across almost the entire Arctic, grinding away the ancient record of the past. But for reasons of geography, the glaciers never covered Elgychigin. So the mud at the bottom of this crater lake has been quietly collecting, undisturbed, for 3.5 million years, the longest continuous climate archive anywhere in the Arctic. In the winter of 2008 to 2009, an international team hauled drilling equipment out onto the frozen lake and pulled up cores of that ancient sediment. What they found was startling, evidence of super warm periods in the deep past when this frozen corner of Siberia was several degrees warmer than today, a real, physical glimpse of what a hotter planet actually looks like. A perfect circle in the middle of nowhere, holding a diary of the Earth millions of years long, and now we leave the mainland behind and head for the ice. From here, the list climbs to the very top of the map. We travel north, up the Taimur Peninsula, the northernmost tongue of the Asian mainland, until the land simply runs out. This final point of rock, jutting into the frozen Arctic Ocean, is Cape Chelyuskin, and it is not just remote. It is, quite literally, the end of the continent, the northernmost point of the entire Eurasian mainland, and the northernmost point of any continental mainland on Earth. Stand here, at just under 78 degrees north, and there is almost nothing between you and the North Pole, only about 1,370 kilometers, roughly 850 miles, of drifting sea ice. There is no land in between. This is the true edge of the old world, and reaching it the first time was an ordeal that defined an era of exploration. It was first attained back in May of 1742 by the Russian naval officer Semyon Chelyuskin, traveling by dog sled through the polar winter as part of the enormous Great Northern Expedition. He recorded it simply as the East-North Cape, never knowing he'd reached the top of a continent. Today, there is a tiny polar station clinging to the cape, first built in 1932, along with what is essentially the northernmost airfield in all of Eurasia. But station gives the wrong impression of comfort. This is one of the harshest inhabited spots on the planet. The average temperature across the entire year is about -13 degrees Celsius, around 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and not a single month of the year on average climbs above freezing. Snow can fall in July. A small rotating crew keeps the instruments running, staring out at a white ocean that stays frozen most of the year. There are no tours here, no harbor, no town, no easy flight. Cape Chelyuskin is a place you reach only as part of a serious Arctic expedition, usually aboard an icebreaker grinding through the pack ice, or not at all. It's the point where the largest landmass on Earth finally surrenders to the ice. And just beyond it, offshore, lies something even more improbable, a place the world didn't even know existed until the 20th century. Just north of Cape Chelyuskin, across a narrow ice-choked strait, lies one of the most remarkable entries on this entire list. Remarkable not for how it looks, but for how recently humanity found it. This is Severnaya Zemlya, which simply means northern land. It is a frozen archipelago of 4 large islands and dozens of small ones. And it holds a title almost nothing else on Earth can claim. It was the last major landmass anywhere on the planet to be discovered. Think about that for a moment. By the 20th century, we had mapped the coastlines of every continent, planted flags across the globe, and were building skyscrapers and flying machines. And yet this archipelago, nearly 37,000 square kilometers of land, larger than many countries, was still completely unknown. It wasn't sighted until 1913, when a Russian expedition, led by Boris Vilkitsky, aboard the icebreakers Taimur and Vagach, came upon an unexpected coastline rising out of the Arctic haze, where the map showed only open sea. But sighting it was only the beginning. The islands were so remote and so hostile that they weren't actually explored and mapped until nearly 2 decades later. Between 1930 and 1932, a team of just 4 men, led by the polar explorer Georgy Ushakov, with the geologist Nikolay Urvantsev, was landed on this frozen wilderness with their dogs, and over 2 brutal Arctic years, they crossed it by sledge and drew the first real map of it. 4 people, mapping an entire archipelago the size of a country in some of the worst conditions on Earth, and it has stayed nearly as empty ever since. About half of Severnaya Zemlya lies buried under permanent ice caps and glaciers, including one of the largest ice masses in all of Russia. There are no towns, no permanent residents, only a lonely polar research station, and the wind. It sits at the intersection of two frozen seas, the Kara and the Laptev, wrapped in pack ice for most of the year. A piece of land the size of a nation that the human race only stumbled upon a little over 100 years ago and still has barely touched. For our next place, we push out into the open Arctic Ocean, into the icy gap between Severnaya Zemlya and the Franz Josef Archipelago, to an island that barely qualifies as land at all. On satellite imagery, it appears as an almost perfectly blank white dome. No coastline detail, no rock, no features, just a smooth cap of ice sitting in a frozen sea. This is Ushakov Island, and it is one of the most desolate places in the entire Russian Arctic. Ushakov is essentially a single ice dome resting on the seabed. Almost the entire island, around 320 square kilometers of it, is buried beneath a permanent ice cap that rises to nearly 300 meters at its center and is up to 250 meters thick. There is virtually no exposed bedrock anywhere on the surface. It is a mound of glacier ice pretending to be an island, surrounded by pack ice, with no more than a few weeks a year when the temperature even creeps above freezing. It was one of the very last pieces of land in the Soviet Arctic to be found, discovered on the 1st of September, 1935, by the same polar explorer who had mapped Severnaya Zemlya, Georgy Ushakov, and it was later named in his honor. For a time, the Soviet Union tried to keep a foothold here. A small hydrometeorological station was opened on the island in 1954, and crews wintered over on this lonely dome of ice, tracking the Arctic weather. It was finally abandoned in 1992, after the Soviet Union collapsed. And here is the haunting part. That station doesn't exist anymore, not because it was demolished, but because the sea took it. The island's ice cap is slowly melting and calving at the edges, and the coastline is eroding away. By 2018, the entire abandoned station complex had been lost to the ocean. The island is literally shrinking beneath itself. Ushakov Island is a place with no people, no rock, and no future. A dome of ancient ice quietly dissolving back into the Arctic that surrounds it. And that brings us to the final place on this list, the most restricted and the most extraordinary of them all. For our final place, we travel to a frozen island off the far northeastern coast of Siberia, ringed by pack ice and hidden behind some of the most restricted borders in the Arctic. It sits about 140 kilometers off the mainland, straddling the line where today meets tomorrow, the 180th meridian. It looks, at first, like just another bleak Arctic island. But this is Wrangel Island, and it may be the single most extraordinary piece of ground on this entire list, because of what was still walking across it in the age of the pyramids. Here is the fact that makes Wrangel unforgettable. When we picture woolly mammoths, we picture the deep ice age, a lost world tens of thousands of years gone. But on Wrangel Island, a small, isolated population of mammoths survived long after their kind had vanished everywhere else on Earth. They were still alive here until only about 4,000 years ago. To be clear about what that means, the Great Pyramid of Giza had already been built. Ancient Egypt was already an established civilization, with kings and writing and monuments, and out here, on this frozen island at the edge of the world, mammoths were still breathing. It is the last place on the planet they ever lived. That isolation is exactly what makes Wrangel so precious, and so protected today. The island has the highest recorded density of polar bear dens anywhere in the world. It's often called the polar bear denning capital of the Arctic. And despite its brutal climate, it supports the richest variety of life in the high Arctic, with over 400 plant species, roughly double what you'd find on any comparable stretch of Arctic tundra. In 1976, the Soviet Union declared the entire island a strict nature reserve, a zapovednik, with the highest possible level of protection, and in 2004, it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You cannot simply go. Access requires special permits, the surrounding sea is locked in ice for much of the year, and human activity is almost entirely forbidden. And the island's human history is a warning in itself. In 1921, an expedition organized by the explorer Vilhjalmur Stephenson tried to claim Wrangel by settling it, landing 4 young men and a 23-year-old Inupiat woman named Ada Blackjack, hired to sew, along with a cat. The relief ship couldn't get through the ice the following year. In January 1923, 3 of the men set out across the frozen sea toward Siberia to find help, and were never seen again. A 4th man died of scurvy that spring, leaving Ada completely alone on the island. She taught herself to hunt and trap, survived the Arctic by sheer will, And when a rescue ship finally broke through in August of 1923, she was the only living person left, the sole survivor of the attempt to tame Wrangel Island. That is what this place is. An island so remote, so hostile, and so fiercely protected that the last mammoths on Earth outlived the rest of their species here by thousands of years, that a well-equipped expedition was almost entirely wiped out trying to live on it, and that today almost no human being is ever allowed to set foot on it at all. For nearly every person alive, Wrangel Island is a place you can only ever visit the way you're visiting it right now, from above, on a screen. What's striking about this whole list is how much of it breaks the story we tell ourselves about the modern world. We assume the map is finished, that everything has been found, reached, and photographed. And yet here is a single country holding a crater science still can't explain, a valley you can only reach by helicopter, a wilderness the size of a state with no roads at all, a lake that records millions of years of climate, an archipelago the size of a nation that we didn't even discover until 1913, and an island where mammoths outlived the pharaohs. Some of these places are impossible to reach because of sheer distance, some because of ice and danger, and some simply because we've decided no one is allowed. But all of them are out there right now, the enormous, frozen, unfinished edges of the largest country on Earth. So out of all of these, which one would you most want to see with your own eyes, if you could actually get there? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, check out my videos on the most impossible to reach places in Europe and the most impossible to reach islands and mountains on Google Earth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.